That's what that is. Anyway, yeah, so Baruch Hashem. And I'm very excited because Israel has decided, unlike other places, but Israel has decided that nobody needs certificates of vaccination or anything else. So my children who are not vaccinated, some of them, who have not been able to, I've not been able to see them for the last couple of years, can now get a ticket to come. They just have to take a test a couple days before they get on the plane, and then take a test when they get here. And they don't have to, unless it should turn out that they are currently sick, they don't have to be in quarantine. They don't have to get a special visa based on, this,
you
that,
don't
or the
have
other
to make a test.
Yeah, it's going to be easy. So
I thought I have to make a test when I come. So I only have to make a test when I go back to Germany. So when I come to Israel, I don't have to make a test. I don't have to. Okay. It's time to get information, but it changed all the time.
Okay. I am having really severe, flutter in it's telling me that I have bad video sound quality. I actually seem to have just fine audio quality, but I have really horrible sound quality. I can't really tell. If it's doing that, I'm thinking maybe I should
original sound off. So you have something else and not your computer.
Maybe it's okay. I hope so. I hope that it's going to be something that people can actually listen to. It'd be sad if it were not. It's being live streamed. We're going to try it. We're going to hope that it's working. I'm going to share the screen. Not over here, but good heavens. I had wanted to show some of the things about the handwriting on the wall. You and I had looked at it because I had a book and I held it up, but I think that was actually after I'd already turned off the recording last week. So a variety of images that artists through the centuries have done. Maybe it's going to show or maybe it's not. Okay, so here's one of them where it says the handwriting on the wall. And so it shows the hand, the fingers, and it shows the pas yad, the including like this part of the hand as well. So you can see this one, which is taking its time. This, I think, here's another one, right, which shows sort of that drunken scene. And now here's Daniel standing there explaining it. There's the hand up above, writing on the wall up high opposite where the chandelier would have been. This is not the image that I had found in the book. I mean, yeah, that I'd found that picture in the book. was really funny. There was one of them where it showed. So this one here is interesting.
Yeah.
Part of what's weird about this from our perspective, this is the old script, not the way that the Torah is written, not the block script that we're using. Well, that's weird. It just went away. It shows it in the old script, but part of what's weird is we're going to hear that the way that they actually ended up having to read it was that instead of its being I want the picture. I don't. This is from, never mind. Don't want this at all. This is their picture of it. It's not a Jewish artist. Most of these are not Jewish artists. And, it shows the hand, but part of what had happened was that actually instead of being written the way that Hebrew is normally written, which is, or the way that we write anything when we use the Hebrew letters, whether it's Judeo-Arabic or whether it's Ladino or whether it's Yiddish or whether it's the Judeo-Aramaic, is we always write it from right to left linearly. And part of what happened with this, we're going to hear, is that it was actually written vertically, which made things harder for for anybody to try to decipher it, because it turned out that they were trying to read the letters going this way, and it wasn't written going this way. It was written going up and down, which was strange. And so this is inaccurate from that perspective. There was one of these pictures that I thought was really funny, because they wrote the phrase that we're going to hear eventually. So like, I don't know to what extent you can, like, I'm sharing. I think I'm sharing. You're seeing the pictures or not? I think I'm sharing this whole screen, but it doesn't have the outline around it, so I can't tell.
No, I can. It's possible.
That's really weird. Okay, hold on a second. It says I'm sharing my screen, but I don't see that I'm sharing my screen. Let me try again, because I'm sitting here talking about pictures. If nobody can see the pictures, that's kind of pointless. This is the one I want to share. I can't tell, because it normally, oh, I see. Never mind. I'm on the wrong. All right. This is so bizarre. Okay. So this in fact is the right words, although it wouldn't actually be written across. And this has the vowels in it, and it wouldn't have had the vowels. This one here is showing it. This is the correct way that it was written. This lower one here, it was written from top down, like this. But we read it. In other words, it's not written this way. It's not mamtos, ninakfe, whatever. It was written up and down. We're going to get to that. And I want to be able to shut this down, because I know that it's causing problems with the recording and stuff. Here's another one that had it. Here's another artist, at least, who basically got it correct. As opposed to that other one that we saw where they showed it being written across the way we normally write things, which is not what it was. Here's the famous the very famous picture.
Nehemiah, you're sharing your whole everything. I have you 4 times now.
Oh my goodness. All right, let me try again. Thank you for letting me know.
As you had it before, in the beginning, it was very good. I have your picture on one
this
side.
One.
And
okay. Yes.
And it is on the other side.
Is this better?
Yes.
Okay. Weird. All right. Anyway, so it's this. My computer is having difficulties, so I don't want to take the time to. But this was the picture that I had found a copy of in my book, this is the king being very frightened. The light is shining on what's on the wall. In order to have everything fit into the canvas, they have the hand much lower down, like even with his face, right opposite where the king is, rather than higher up on the wall, which is the description that we had. These are just all various different versions of that same thing. Were there any others? Here's one that's more like it. The hand is, you see the hand is much higher up. Okay. The only problem, of course, is that if you focus in on it, you see that the words are written in Latin letters. I don't know if you can see it, but it's that the many tekel uparsin is MENE, and then the tekel is TEKEL. It's not written in Hebrew script, and it's certainly not written in the Aramaic cryptic ideograms that we heard about back in chapter 1. So at any rate, but artists through the centuries have taken liberties with this story, but have really wanted to. It's a very powerful, it's a very powerful story, right? So here's one where you see, completely there it is, the handwriting on the wall, but it's not, that's clearly not the script that it was, and etc. But everybody, and this is, who knows? To my eye, this looks more like Egyptian dress than it does like Persian dress. But every artist can do what they want to with the when they want to try to illustrate something like that. Okay, so I'm going to get rid of those images. I had said that I would try to, show it so that we would actually see what was going on. In general, we usually like to be able to see Malbim, so I'm going to keep Malbim off to the side. Although I'm not going to do it. So I wanted to go through a little bit of how Ramat Valley saw some of these things. Okay. And I want, for my sake, so that I can see this, see everything that I have on my screen. So the Ramat Valley started off, and he said, it's not at all surprising. He gives a different reason, by the way, or a different understanding of what the whole Sefer is altogether. I said that it felt to me like this Sefer is essentially Daniel's, not exactly a scrapbook, but like a diary, whatever, of important things that had happened in his life. And sometimes, when things are going same old, there's not much to write about. And he wasn't trying, it's not an official diary of all the different tasks and jobs that he was given, etc. But from time to time, there were things that he felt necessary, to write down, to be able to go back and look at, to contemplate, whatever. It felt to me more that it was being written from his perspective. We see later on, he writes not only about these stories, these things that happened to him, but also about visions that he himself had, about back in Elul, we did Out of Order, right? We did chapter 9, which is about his very strong prayer on behalf of Am Yisrael and the Beit HaMikdash to be rebuilt, etc. And that, but at any rate, I was suggesting that it was, if that's all that it were, to be honest, then it's kind of questionable as to what it's doing in Tanakh. Ramat Valley says the whole point of the book is to talk about the miracles that took place in Bavel over the course of Daniel's life. And so that's why we don't hear anything further about Nebuchadnezzar, because once he had that period of being out of his mind and then coming back to himself and acknowledging that God runs the world and that God determines who's the king and who's not the king, and that it's not in the hands of man, but it's in God's hands, then Nebuchadnezzar essentially had served his purpose, and there were no more miracles in his time. The reason we don't hear anything about the reign of Evel Merodach or anybody else between Nebuchadnezzar and Belshazzar is because there weren't any miracles during that time. There were the everyday kinds of miracles, right? There were babies. There were, all of the ongoing, God recreating the world every moment of every day kind of miracles. But the miracles that feel to us like they're totally out of the ordinary, those kinds of miracles there weren't. And so there was God's greater glory was not being revealed. Time was going by. There was going to be this 70-year period. And so not much else is happening during this period until now, where it's time for it to be the end of the rule of the Kasdim, and it's going to shift over to the Persians and the Medians, and where the Esther story is about to fit in, and where eventually how do we put it? I'm sorry, I'm just blanking on the word for the minute. English, anyway. The decree that allows the rebuilding of the Beit HaMikdash is going to take place later in the book, but nothing else has happened. And so the fact that we don't hear anything doesn't mean that Daniel, didn't have ongoing jobs and all sorts of other important things that he was involved in over the decades, but there was nothing else. And the Ramat Valley says that the whole book is about Kavod Hashem, that if you look at it, it's about showing God giving opportunities for the kavod of the tzaddik to be recognized in the sense of that that's also a Kiddush Hashem. That's also a way of sanctifying God's name, is when the tzaddik is seen to be, the only possible address for knowledge and for wisdom. And when the tzaddik is somebody who is humble as Daniel is, and is somebody who ascribes everything that he has to God, that re-emphasizes that. And so Ramad Vali says that's the purpose of this Sefer, which is actually, to my mind, much more satisfying, perhaps description of what's going on in the Sefer compared to the way that it's written, may be the way that I described it, but the purpose for the writing of it and the purpose for which it got entered into Tanakh, I think the Ramad Vali has a much more satisfying description. So that was one thing that I really liked about that. Another thing that he has to say is, I kind of hinted at it, right? We know that in the Megillah, Achashverosh also takes out the kelim from the Beit HaMikdash to be used. Not just takes them out so that everybody can see them, look how beautiful they are, look at how strong we are, that we've overcome the God of Israel or whatever. Not that, but rather that that we have this, that he actually took them out to use them. And so the Ramad Vali addresses it directly, that we haven't seen the other Mefarshim do that yet. The Ramad Vali addresses directly what's the difference between Belshazzar, who gets punished, we'll see that soon, and Achashverosh, who seemingly doesn't get punished for having done the same thing. And what are the reasons? So one reason the Gemara does raise this question also. One reason that's given is that once Belshazzar had used them, that once there's been what we call in Hebrew me'ilah, a misappropriation of that which is sacred for profane or just everyday personal use, which is a sin. But once that's happened, then the item in question is no longer sanctified, or it no longer has the same degree, certainly, of sanctity that it had before. And so it could be that because Belshazzar had done this, then, and this is not offered by Ramad Vali, by the way, as one of his two reasons as to the difference, but this is one possible explanation, is that once Belshazzar had done it, he had removed the sanctity from it. So when Achashverosh does it, they are not holy kelim in the same way that they were earlier, because some of that holiness, some of that sanctity has been removed from them. It is still a bizayon. It's still a disgrace to Am Yisrael to have been there and not to have, torn kriya over the fact that the kelim were on display and being used at a drinking feast. Because even if they're not still holy, they are still kelim that once upon a time were used in the Beit HaMikdash. So they are things which, it should have struck to the heart of the people and should have made them very sad. And instead, seemingly, either they continued to enjoy the feast or they turned their heads, whatever they did, but they didn't object and they didn't cry out. And so that was part of the problem. But Ramat Valley offered a couple of other issues here. He said one thing is that what we heard in the description of try closing, I don't know what else I can close. I don't know what else I can close. I tell you what, I guess I don't need to have the thing for Ramat Valley open. Just close that down, see if that helps. I don't know what to do. I was planning on actually using that other source. Sorry about that. But so part of, anyway, so Ramat Valley suggests two things. One is he said that Belshazzar, we heard, was attributing the fact that they had the kelim to be to the honor of all of his various kinds of idols. And he was using the kelim not just in the, maybe if I just click on that, I'm good. They were using the kelim not just at the feast, but they were using the kelim to make offerings before the idols. And so it wasn't just a case of misappropriation, but of actually using it for avodah zarah. And so there we go. I'm just trying to shut other things down because my computer keeps warning me that the audio quality is bad and whatever, and I don't want that to be a problem too much. So now we should be back to where we are. All right. So he suggests that the reason that Belshazzar was punished where Achashverosh was not punished is that Belshazzar not only was using it for himself, but he was using it in a way to specifically degrade it and to disgrace the kelim and to use them for avodah zarah, where what Nebuchadnezzar had done, we heard about it earlier in the first chapter. What Nebuchadnezzar had done is he had brought the things to Bavel. He had put them on display briefly in, like showing them off to his idols or whatever, but then he hid them away in the treasure house, which, in other words, he protected them, he guarded them, but they didn't remain on permanent display to try to, to show their victory over Am Yisrael, over God. And so what he did was reasonably respectful. What Belshazzar does is as disrespectful as possible. The other thing is that they, not only that, but they actually used them for drinking. Now, the kelim from the Beit HaMikdash, and that's also, this issue with what Achashverosh does too, to some extent, is the kelim from the Beit HaMikdash were not goblets. Okay, they weren't normal drinking things. They were called a mizrakah. They were sort of cone-shaped sort of things. They were made in such a way that you couldn't set them down, because the idea was that oftentimes they would catch, right? They would catch the blood in one of the kelim, and they would have to keep it stirring, keep it moving. And so they were made in such a way that you couldn't they certainly didn't have a flat base like my mug, but it wasn't even like a goblet thing that then also comes down and has a flat base so it can be stood on the ground or set down somewhere. They were specifically made in such a way that they had to be held the entire time so that you could keep it moving. And even when maybe they, there are certain times in the Beit HaMikdash where like they would catch it and they would maybe not hand it off to somebody else, but they would have like a special stand, and you could put this this mizrak or mizrakah, depending on how you could like put it into the stand, but it didn't stand on its own. It wasn't something that you could set down. You could put it into this thing, so it was sort of like hanging there in the air, being suspended in the air while you were shifting gears from one thing to the next. But they're not kelim that would normally be used on a table. Okay. And so to bring them to the table and to drink from them was an intentional disgrace. And so perhaps that's why Belshazzar is punished. And to be honest, the other reason that the Ramat Valley gives is Belshazzar, that the time had come. Okay, it was 70 years of Bavel. It wasn't yet 70 years from the Churban, but it was 70 years of Bavel. And we saw, again, back in chapter 1, we saw that there were actually two different prophecies or two different wordings of the prophecy of Yirmiyahu. One of them was 70 years of Bavel, and one of them was 70 years from the destruction. And the 70 years from the destruction are not up because Nebuchadnezzar has the Beit HaMikdash destroyed in the 18th year of his reign. And so there's another 18 years to go. But the 70 years of Bavel are up. And so one of the things the Ramat Valley says is that when the time for something comes, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is essentially mazmin all of the circumstances, right? And he said, somewhat lahavdil, he said, look, Chazal say, Tzidkiyahu, during whose reign the Beit HaMikdash was destroyed, right? Tzidkiyahu was by no means the worst of the kings of the house of David. By no means. Menashe was much worse, but not only Menashe, others in more, closer to him also were much worse than he was. He was a little weak, he was a little wishy-washy, but he was actually, relatively speaking, he was better. He was already better than some of the others. But the Churban happened in his time. Not because of him per se, but because the full amount of sin, the inability to do a proper tshuva, all came together at that moment. And so the Beit HaMikdash was destroyed. And so he says also about Belshazzar, okay, so he's a drunken fool, right? And he is treating the kelim of the Beit HaMikdash disgracefully. But he's getting punished where Achashverosh is not getting punished because the time had come for Bavel for the costume to be removed from the world stage. And with Achashverosh, the time had not come. And so it's not a question of was he so much worse than Achashverosh? It was at that moment. So we see in history that there are things that happen, and you say, like, why did it happen now and it didn't happen then? There are things that in the fullness of time has come. This is when it needed to happen. And it's not that this particular wrongdoing is or right doing, okay, is what tipped the balance so much as it is the fullness of time has come and this is when it's going to happen. We tend to try to see things in terms of short range cause and effect. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu looks at things in much longer range cause and effect. And so I think that's part of the message that the Ramat Valley was trying to give us about this. I mean, he had some interesting, the Ramat Valley, as we've seen, will go back and forth between some things which are very esoteric to the point that I just say, okay, wow, I'm glad he has this idea. I don't know how to explain it. And things which are almost like on a psychological level that he's explaining the psychology or the sociology of what's going on. So much of the rest of what he had to offer was interesting, but he also agrees, as I told you, the issue of the queen who comes to suggest to Belshazzar that maybe he should listen to Daniel, right? One of the reasons that people suggest that is because she had been around, right? She had been around when Daniel was better known. As time was going by and no new miracles were happening, so people were sort of, forgetting who Daniel is. And he was an older man by then, and Belshazzar's the young Turk, and we see this sort of thing happening over and over again. And so And so Ramat Valley doesn't really offer us anything that was different, from there. He wasn't offering something that was particularly different as to why it was that the Queen Mother knew and that Belshazzar didn't know or didn't think about Daniel. He does point out things. We're going to get to it in a little bit with the new Psukim. He does point out that Belshazzar overall was somebody who didn't have respect for others, and didn't have respect for what had gone before him, etc. Whether that added to its being the right time for Bavel to leave the world stage, whether that was a symptom of its time for Bavel to leave the world stage, that's not clear. And I don't know that he particularly did that. I don't remember if we talked about this last time or not. One of the questions that the Malbim had asked is that it says twice, basically, that Belshazzar was mightily afraid and that his countenance changed, and so Malbim, of course, says, why does it say it twice? And then he offers 3 reasons. He's a very organized writer. He's really great. And so he says, well, there were 3 reasons, right? One is he didn't see any hope that the matter could be, that he would be able to know or understand what was going on. And so, when he first thinks to call in all of the other chachamim, the ones that he knows about, so he sort of returned to himself. He'd been very afraid, and then he kind of returned to himself. He's like, "Oh, okay, never mind. I'll bring in all these wise people. One of them will surely be able to help me." When they weren't able to help him, so he returns. If anything, he returns to a greater state of terror than he had been in before, says Malbim, because he'd had a moment of hope, and then it was dashed. Right. The second reason was that had his wise men, necromancers, fortune tellers, whatever, been able to give him an answer, he could have ascribed it to his avodah zarah. He could have ascribed it to, evil spirits in the world, whatever, the kind of supernatural world that he thinks he's living in, natural / supernatural kinds of stuff, all intermixed. But it would have been in some sense comfortable, and it would be something that he could negotiate with, and this, that, and the other. When it gets to the point that none of his various kinds of soothsayers, fortune tellers, tarot card readers, whatever, none of them can engage with this. So then he knows it's not from these sources of Tuma, but rather it's from the supernal God. And that's scary to him. Okay. And that's what Malbim tells us, is that. So then he sees it's really from God. Okay. And the fact that it's like from God means that, oh, God really exists. Oh, I just did something that was really stupid. Oh, he's been living his life in a way that is ignoring the fact that there's a single creator. And now he's being brought face to face with it. And that's very scary to him. And the third reason that the Malbim suggests is because the knowledge, the fact that this announcement, this, whatever this is that's written on the wall, has come to him from heaven, is so that he should know what the evil times are that are coming, and he should prepare himself. Like, how could he escape from it? But the only way to escape would be by doing tshuva. Or is it possible to escape from it by other kinds of deeds and stratagems and schemes and stuff? But when there's no way to understand what the handwriting on the wall is saying to him, so then it can't be that it's coming to warn him about something. So maybe it's just coming to say, this is the decree. And that is, again, something. So Malbim says, yes, it's the same words about his being, his countenance changing, his being, overcome with fear, but it's all in this time. It's all in response to the fact that his wise men, etc., are unable to help him. So we had gotten, I think, to right here. We'd gotten to Yud Bet. Did we get to Yud Dalet? I think maybe we got to Yud Dalet. Did we? I'm not sure. I'm going to start over from Yud Gimel anyway. Okay, the Queen Mother says that there's a man who has this Ruach Elokim, Kadishin, holy, okay, in him, and in the days of your father, grandfather, actually, his seichel shed light on all sorts of things, and it was well known, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, and so we're gonna start where Daniel shows back up again. And it's telling me again that I have low system resources. I do not see anything else that I can close, because if I close anything else, I'm going to either lose Zoom or I'm going to lose the YouTube recording. So I'm just going to have to let it keep running and hope that it gets better on its own. Okay, so we're going back into the story. Hands away from being in front of my mouth. I apologize. B'dain Daniel hu al kadam malka. So then Daniel was brought in before the king. Ane malka v'amar Daniel antu Daniel di min b'nei galuta di Yehud di Haiti malka avi min Yehud. Says the king says to Daniel, you're this person named Daniel, who is a child of the exile from Judea, that the king, my father, brought from Judea, right? And, the question the Malbim asks is, why does Belshazzar remind Daniel, or try to identify Daniel, that he's one of these people from the Galut? One possibility is he's trying to reestablish the hierarchy, right? I'm from the kings of Bavel. We conquered your people, so I'm high and you're low. That's an answer that I would tend to suggest is what's going on here. And then also in this next verse, so what is the next verse before we read Malbim's question on it? V'shim'et alach, I heard about you, di ruach elokin bach, that the Spirit of God is in you, v'nahiru v'sachlatanu v'chachma yetera hishtakach bach, and that great enlightenment and knowledge and exceptional degree of wisdom are to be found in you. And then so the Malbim says, so what's different in this verse that I just read to you, which seems to be then duplicated again in the very next verse, because then Belshazzar, and we don't hear Daniel responding yet, by the way, like the king says to him this and the king says to him that, but we don't hear Belshazzar responding. Uchan hualu kadamai chachimai ya ashvaya dik tavadna yikron ufishre lahodat dautani. And he says, and so now, by the way, just immediately before you, right, all of the wise men and magician type people, okay, were brought before me, that they should read this handwriting, they should read this inscription here, and that they should make its meaning known to me. V'la kahalein shar milta lahachavaya, and they weren't able to explain anything. They weren't able to tell anything over of what it meant. V'ana, and I, shim'ei talach, and I heard it, and I heard about you. So I don't know how Malbim's going to answer. Actually, it says Malbim doesn't answer here. He must have answered earlier, but so he says, Belshazzar. But what I like about Malbim's questions is that a lot of times, I mean, his answers are also amazing, but his questions help me like hone in on, well, what do I understand from what's going on here? Not that I'm on the level of any of our Parshanim, I'm not. But when you meet a holy text, it's supposed to speak to you, and you're supposed to see how does it apply. And clearly you need the help of Chazal for understanding all these things. But at the same time, the simple text, can do it. And sometimes you need help to see what are the clues in the text that give you, that should be raising a question in your mind, and you should be able to try to come up with, what do I see? Because they're going to be all different levels of meaning, and different ways of explaining it. So what's the difference between the first time when the first time he's talking, Daniel's brought before the king, and the king says to Daniel, okay, this is who you are, and I've heard about you. And this is what I've heard about you. Okay. And it's like that first bit is the king is somehow trying to establish where they are with respect to each other in some kind of hierarchy of importance, etc. We saw Lahavdil, if you had studied Melachim Aleph, after Shlomo dies and his son Rechavam becomes the king. Rechavam doesn't want any of Shlomo or David's advisors. He wants to surround himself with people his own age. This is a theme that shows up more than once in Tanakh, and it's a theme that shows up in human society in general. There, on the one hand, we know about that there are people who were wise, people who were successful, etc., in a previous generation. But if we don't have a good self-image of ourselves, we find that very threatening, because how can I compete? And so we tend to cast them aside and look for people that reinforce our shaky self-image, and it seems to me that that's part of what Belshazzar is doing here also. You very much see it in the story of Rechavam, but I think you're also seeing the same sort of thing going on here. And so this is part of this jockeying for position. I am the king. You're just an exile. I did hear that you had this stuff, but he doesn't say. I mean, this is one of the things that Ramad Vali brought up when I was reading through his parishes. He says, Belshazzar just says, I heard this, not it's known, not it's clear, not you are this person with Ruach HaKodesh, etc. But this is what I've heard about you. Not sure I really believe it, but this is what I've heard. Okay. And so that's what the initial comment is. And then he goes on and he says, so in the meantime, but before I bothered, as it were, to consult with you, I first consulted with all these other people. And then he says, then I heard about you, that di tuchal pishrin lemifshar v'kitrin lemishra, that you can, you're good at explaining things and at untying knots. Kitrin lemishra means that you can untie the knots, right? Lahatir masha kashur. So sort of like later on in history, not so much later on in history, the story about Alexander and the Gordian knot, which he solved by taking a sword to it and cutting it through. That untied the knot. But here the notion of that you untie knots is a metaphor for how to explain things which are knotty, which are difficult, or there are other things in terms of how when there's a difficulty, whether it's in human relations or in how to run the country or this, that, or the other, how to get, how to unravel the difficulties in the situation so that a good solution can be found. So Khan had tikul ktava lemikre ufishre lahodatune. And now he says, if you'll be able to read this writing and to make known its explanation to me, Argvana Tilbosh, you'll wear the royal purple. Micha di Dahava al Tzavarach, and this necklet of gold will be put on your neck. Utlata b'malchuta tishlat, and you'll rule over a third of the kingdom. Because Ramad Vali says he didn't really want to offer this to Daniel, but he was forced to do it because, this is this thing already that we've seen that that which a king says he can't go back on. It comes up much more forcefully, of course, in the Megillat Esther story, but in general, a person should abide by his words, right? And that's not just a value within Judaism. That's a human value. A person should be trustworthy to abide by his words. If he says something, he should be able to be trusted with it. And all the more so if the person is a king, all right? Because you can't have a kingdom or any kind of government is somehow based on some level of trust between the government and the governed. And if they can't count on that level of trust, the social contract, as it were, the whole thing falls apart. And so a king has to abide by his word. So once he had made that offer of the royal clothing and the special necklace and to rule a third of the kingdom, once he had made that offer to the other chachamim, then he has to make the same, he's forced into making that same offer to Daniel. We're not even up to Daniel's interpretation yet. We're working on it. B'dayin ane Daniel v'mar kada malka mat natachlach heaven un vaz biatan la'achran hab Bram katava ekre l'malchuta u'pishrei ahodine. So he says, so then Daniel responds before the king and he says, your gift can stay with you. Right. And or you can, and if you want to, and this other stuff, like, you know, the clothing and the whatever, you can give it to somebody else. But as for the writing, I'll read it to the king and I will make its explanation now. Malbim says, why did Daniel say this? Okay. It's like he's insulting the king. Like, I don't want your gift. I don't need your gift. What exactly is Daniel saying here? Is he saying, oh, I am going to I'm going to do this, but it's not, there are lots of things it could be. It could be, oh yeah, well, this is such a minor thing. It's really not worth such an extravagant gift as what you're offering. Like, I don't care. Or, I'll do it. It's not a big deal, but I don't need the reward, which isn't so much disparaging and insulting to the king as it is disparaging and insulting to all of the other chachamim who weren't able to do it. Is it that Daniel also has a sense that this is the end? So what good is a gift from this Belshazzar going to do him by tomorrow? It's over and done with. Anyway, so skip it. I don't need it. By the way, that's something, that Malbim also talked about. I didn't bring it directly in his words, and Vali also spoke about it, is why was the king so frightened? Like, what the heck was going on? It was that even though they didn't yet know what it said. Okay, Daniel, and I thought we were going to get to Daniel's interpretation, and we're not going to today, but we'll get to that next week. But what's so frightening? Until you know what it actually says, okay, like, it's supernatural, it's spooky. But what's so frightening? That there was evidently a sense of impending doom. That Ramat Valley says that Belshazzar's heart understood, the feeling, that the Liba Bina, that understanding heart, his heart understood what the import was, even though he didn't know what the exact letters and the exact words meant, but he already had the sense of it was over. And that's frightening to people. But so why is Daniel answering the king this way? Like, it's a good question. Yeah. So let's see if we can keep keep going a little bit. I don't know if I have time. I mean, there's not another break. As you see, there's not another break, mamish, till the end of the chapter. And so the whole rest of the chapter is Daniel's explanation. But we'll try to get started on it, maybe one more verse, or maybe even two. It says, Ant Malka, you're the king. Elaha ilah malchuta urvuta v'yakara v'hadra yahav l'Nebuchadnezzar avu. The high king, the high God, the supernal God, okay, gave royalty and greatness and honor and splendor to Nebuchadnezzar, your father. Okay. This jockeying over status that's going on between them is something else. Okay. Umin ruvuta di yahav le kol amamayu umayu v'lishnaya havu zayin udachalin min kadamohi. And because of the greatness that God gave him, God isn't being repeated here, but that he capital H-E, right? God, he gave to him, Nebuchadnezzar, all of the peoples and the nations and the languages, etc. All of these people were afraid of him, of Nebuchadnezzar. Dihava tzaveh hava katel, v'dihava tzaveh hava meche. That whoever he wanted to, he would kill, and whoever he wanted to, he would keep alive. V'dihava tzaveh hava marim, dihava tzaveh hava mashpil. And that whoever Nebuchadnezzar wanted to raise up, he raised up, and whoever he wanted to, he brought down. Di rim livei v'ruchei tikvat lahazada. Hanchat min karse machuta yikare heidu mineh. And because of the haughtiness of his heart, how high his heart got raised up, and his spirit became so strong to right? So God brought him down. This is now a reference to the chapter that we read previously, that God brought him down off of his royal throne and removed all of his honor from him. Umin v'nei nasha tarid levave im chevata v'im aradaya medore. Is bekatorin yita'amune umital shmaya gishme yitztaba. Adi yadadi shalit alaka ilah b'malchuta anasha uluman di yitzbe yahakim elah. And he was essentially exiled from humanity. In other words, he lost his mind. And his heart was just placed with the animals. And his dwelling place was with the arad, is often like a wild donkey. There are other meanings possible for that type of animals. He ended up living with the animals, and he ate grass like the oxen, and from the dew of the heavens and the rain of the heavens, that's what he had to drink, till he got to the point that he knew in his bones, all right, that there's a supernal God who rules over all the kingdoms of mankind, and that whomever God, wants to put in place, to establish, that person is established. It's not that Nebuchadnezzar has the power of life and death and of raising people up and bringing people down. It's God who has that power. And Nebuchadnezzar came to the point of knowing that. So all of this as an introduction, okay, is an interesting introduction, because what does this have to do with the handwriting on the wall? Right? And so he says one more thing. He says to him, Va'ant berei Belshazzar, la hashbelt levavcha, slicha, kol kavel di kol dana yadat. And you, his son, Belshazzar, or his descendant, right? You have not humbled your heart. You haven't brought your heart down. And so, but you know all of this. You know what happened to Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar didn't keep it a secret. It's not something that they hid from the people, or that they may have hid it during the time that it was going on, but it's not something that remained hidden, because we know there's that letter, okay, that Daniel entered verbatim into Sefer Daniel. That's this letter. It's not Daniel's words, right? It's this letter that was Nebuchadnezzar's words about what had happened and his acknowledgement. And you, his son, you should know this, but you still haven't humbled your heart. You are the whether it's a sin, whether it's a midah ra'ah, okay, the haughtiness, the notion that a human can be in charge of the world and what's going on in the world is a falsehood. It's not just that it's a failure to give kavod, give honor to Kadosh Baruch Hu, but it is such a false way of looking at the world. And that was the failure of Ashur, okay, which may very well explain why Nebuchadnezzar was identified with Ashur, as well as, right? He was. We have those midrashim that were bothering me before, because it makes him a very old man, and Chazal don't care about that. The point is that they were saying that the midah ra'ah that was Ashur comes to an even higher degree of actualization in Nebuchadnezzar. And we see various versions of it. We also saw it with Paro. We see it over and over again. And it's something that we ourselves have to learn from. We ourselves as individuals, we ourselves as Am Yisrael also have to learn, because it's not, it's not only somebody outside, that fails to really recognize that God runs the world. We often think that we're in charge, that we can control things. And we also have to, we need to not lower ourselves, like beat ourselves up and make ourselves, feel like we're incapable. We're very capable, because God created us. We're very capable. But we need to recognize where we are in the scheme of things. We are not the Borei Yitbarach. Okay, we're not the creator. We're not the ones who are mechaye, who are giving life and renewal. But we are able to work in this world. We're given our free choice. We're given all these things that we are, but we need to recognize where we are in the picture and not try to take on a role that's not ours. And that's part of what Bavel represents, it's putting it outside of ourselves, because maybe it's easier for us to learn the lesson by looking at what's outside of ourselves. But that's what Daniel is throwing in Belshazzar's face. Right. So I know we started a little late, but I think the hour is up. So we'll pick up with verse 23. I'm going to stop the share and stop the recording. And I really hope